in the centre pages, so I'm going to resort to that. It's the work of our boys. So, Mr. Arun Jaitley was born on the 28th of December, 1952. His father was a lawyer and his mother a social worker. He began his schooling at St. Saviour's in Delhi and then studied commerce at SRCC. He then continued to attain his degree in law from Delhi University. The onset of his political journey was when he was elected the president of the Student Union, and he joined the BJP in 1980 and was soon made president for its youth wing. Arun Jaitley is a prominent leader of the BJP and has since been part of the Rajya Sabha since 2000 and has attained a number of prestigious posts since then. He was appointed leader of the opposition in 2003, after which he has held several cabinet offices, including defence and finance ministries. I also understand, from a little bit of reading, that he decries the lack of humour in politics these days, and we're all hoping that he'll show us how it's done tonight. Welcome, sir.
Mr. Gautam Thapa, the chairman of the Board of Governors of the school, the distinguished members of the Board of Governors, the headmaster of the school, members of the teaching staff, whom you conventionally call the masters, the parents and students of the Doon School. Let me at the very outset express my gratitude to Gautam and the school for having invited me to associate with this Founders' Day celebration of the school today. While I was listening to a detailed presentation of the headmaster, I was trying to note the differences in the environment of schools at a time when people belonging to my generation went and the environment that exists today. And that can best be answered by a question. As soon as I entered the Doon School premises, I was approached to answer a few questions for your magazine. And one of our young friends confidently shot off a number of questions, the first one being, are you concerned that a number of students, when they pass out of school, are going abroad for education and many of them are settling down there? Well, I suddenly remembered the difference. When I studied in school and then graduated into college, we lived in a country which suffered from huge unemployment. We used to produce a few engineers, a few doctors, and some of them, if they managed to get an opportunity to move out of the country, they probably thought that it was either in the United States or in Western Europe that the land of opportunity existed. And a phrase which we had coined those days used to be that India suffers from a brain drain. These days I don't hear that phrase much. And probably one of the reasons is, and that's what I told our young friend, that these days I'm not particularly worried that happens. So I have an uneasy feeling why that is happening. And probably one of the reasons is that getting into good colleges in India is almost becoming next to impossible. I went to a college and I happen to be associated with its management even now. And every year we are told that this time it's not 97% but 98%, which is the cutoff to get into that college. Equally difficult is to get into some of the prestigious medical or engineering institutions. And if you have anything between 90 to 95% when you pass out of school, you are at your wit's end as to which institution you will get admission into. Probably the best will not be available for that kind of a percentage. And I have an uneasy feeling that this is one of the reasons why this is happening. If we look at the population profile of the world, we are probably one of the few countries where population still has not stabilized. We have many more people than we can absorb and subsume into our economy. And the collapse of the various family structures in many parts of the world, life becoming more difficult commercially, economically, and this would be now reflected in the debate in the US presidential election. That one of the reasons why from a left or an extreme right point of view, you see a lot of angry voters in probably the richest country in the world, is that the pressures of taxation, the pressures of economy, the cost of life, the cost of maintaining families, well, if it costs you $50,000 a year to send your child to a college, then there is bound to be an undercurrent of distrust in those societies. And therefore the families are narrowing down in that part of the world. So this demographic differential which has been created, we have more people than what we can handle and they have probably less. And therefore movement of individuals as an economic necessity or also as an economic resource will take place. And this is now reflected. That whenever, and the most visible sign is when you see the Prime Minister visiting any part of the world, the emphatic presence of the diaspora, which is now finding its own sense of confidence in those parts of the world. So one of the big differences now, which is taking place, is that India has become far more competitive. And therefore, getting into the best educational institutions itself has become a big challenge. Initially, at the level of higher education, we did not encourage too many private institutions. It's a trend that caught up in the last 20 to 30 years. I normally quite readily accept invites to visit educational institutions. And almost at an average of about once a week, once in 10 days, I visit one or the other. I believe that we stand at a cusp of history where numerically the private institutions are now expanding. We initially thought that they hadn't measured up to the standards which were expected. For One, their infrastructure is now better than government-supported institutions. Some of the better ones have started hiring staff at very competitive salaries. And therefore, a lot of people now you will find from established universities over the last year or two moving into private institutions. There is far greater autonomy and independence in fixing your syllabi. And I do hope over the next few years, if not a decade or so, many of them will turn into quality institutions. That's already started happening. And probably the opportunities then would increase. But the moot point today is, at a time when I went to school and then graduated into college, even if you were in the category of mediocrity, you did manage to enter an institution. Today it is quite unlikely. Mediocrity is going to leave you somewhere lost in the crowd at the bottom. And today the space, the struggle for excellence as you emerge has become more and more difficult. Standards, as I said, have become tougher. The kind of avenues and resources you have for enriching yourself. Technology itself has become a big facilitator in that. And therefore the shaping of the human minds that can take place today at a young and an early age is far more than what used to be a few decades ago. We are increasingly becoming competitive. Standards of excellence are much higher. Beyond a point, it won't even matter what social backgrounds you came from. I've always had a favorite example that if we prepared the list of the first 25 odd business groups in India that existed before 1991 and compared it with the best 25 today, you probably will find only 4 or 5 names in common. 80% of those who didn't exist before that date have suddenly emerged and taken the center stage. Which is, of course, a proof of the fact that amongst this large crowding at the bottom, there is a huge space on top. So people who have been coming up with unconventional ideas, people who have been breaking new ground, people who have been thinking off track, they are the ones who probably will find that space for excellence and get onto a fast track in life much ahead of the others. These days we hear the phrase startups. After all, who are these startups? It's actually a crazy bunch of people. Because they're born to think differently. They are disruptors. They haven't followed the normal settled path. They didn't decide to take up a job or enter a family business and just go at the conventional pace. They tried to break new ground. There was a huge failure percentage amongst them. But those who succeeded, they disrupted existing businesses. and they created a new path for themselves. And that's probably why you find that today, what have these disruptors really done? They created ideas, they implemented ideas. The ideas had some support of technology. And therefore, you had the world's largest retailer emerge. And this largest retailer in the world doesn't own a single store. He created an idea by which he could own the largest retail business without owning a store. So he didn't have to invest the kind of money which normally people do have. You have the biggest transporter in the world. He doesn't own a single vehicle. He created an idea and he's disrupted businesses across cities in the world. Now, we've in the past in India missed many glorious opportunities. Of course, in this part of the world, the Industrial Revolution didn't touch us at all. It was North America, it was Europe that got impacted by it. They benefited. The wealth they earned on that strength sustains them till today. Then came a second stage where you found after the war, countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, they used the power of technology aimed at the global markets, created products for the global market, and suddenly became flourishing economies. You then had China, which broke away from, at least in terms of the economic system, if not the political system, went in for mass production, economies of scale, low cost, and posed a challenge to the developed economies in the world. Now, while all this was happening, we were still constrained by regulation, slogans, lacking that killer instinct to go ahead, happy with those 2%, 3% growth. Till one fine day we got reformed, not out of choice but out of compulsion. But then we, even by compulsion, we came onto the right track. And I think this historic opportunity has revisited us. And in this revisiting the opportunities which we have missed in the past, I think we can see a large number of changes taking place. And the most important change is that India now has become far more aspirational. India is not only aspirational, it's become far more impatient. And today, the rest of the world is facing its own challenges. To be honest with you, the world which is moving through a slowdown phase, I see a collapse of ideas taking place because nobody in the world is able to predict either how long this global slowdown will go on and what really is the way to get out of it. So even the best experts speak in generalities. We must have structural changes, we must employ monetary tools, we must apply all fiscal tools. But when it comes to specifics, nobody is offering a solution, nobody is even offering an idea as to how long this world slowdown will last. At least I don't recollect reading a single expert having told us 2 years ago that the oil prices were about to collapse, or that the commodity prices were about to collapse. And therefore the world is quite in the dark as to which direction it will go into. More particularly, the developed world is under pressure. And that pressure is now clearly visible in the kind of debates, as I said, in the US presidential elections. The decision in United Kingdom to exit from the European Union. The pressures are obvious. They are obvious in European economies. And curiously, a situation that favors India has emerged out of this. It favors us to a limited extent that the world, in order to grow, wants higher oil prices, it wants higher commodity prices. And we in India are net buyers. So the low price regime suits us. It gives us enough flexibility, it gives us enough resource to divert elsewhere. And therefore we find ourselves in a spot where even in an adverse situation, we managed to do fairly well. Though ideally we would have loved it to be much higher. So we are positioned in a place when the going is good. Normally everybody is at his best. But when the going is terrible, at that stage, to sustain, survive and grow is far more challenging. And therefore we've tried to do that. And in some measure of success, we managed to achieve that. How do I see the situation down the tunnel? If I look down next 10 years, 20 years, I find that this network of educational institutions being created across the country is going to throw up a very powerful resource. And if you look at this resource, it's not only going to be of great impact in India, it's also going to be globally of a greater impact. And that's quite evident. In fact, one of the unstated factors which is never mentioned, which in a number of countries is of also importance to our foreign policy, is that people of Indian origin being extrovertish are creating an impact in those countries itself. So when the British government decided to put Gandhiji's statue in the Parliament Square, besides wanting to honor Gandhiji, there was a political message they wanted to give to their own people. And now it's not only in a few countries it's happening. If you go to Australia, if you go to New Zealand, you'll probably find similar reactions which are going on. And I think our main challenge is going to be that India would have to utilize this potential and create far greater equity. We probably would, at the pace which we are going, be able to improve public infrastructure over the next 1 decade significantly. You can already see improvements taking place. There are improvements in our highways, in our airports. We have more power than what we need for the first time in history. Hopefully our railway systems will improve. Our public delivery systems will improve. But what really will have to improve is the quality of rural India. And in rural India more particularly, some of the most vulnerable sections, the tribals. And that is what India needs to address over these years. I do believe when I said that standards of excellence have become tougher, a particular idea was crossing my mind as I was coming to this great institution. What would be one of the challenges for an institution like yours? You are indeed one of the foremost institutions in the country. Any institution is judged by the quality of its environment, the quality of its academics, the quality of its alumni, the quality of its teaching staff. And I think you've excelled on most of these counts. We have always obliterated this distinction between excellence and the struggle to achieve that excellence and creation of elitism. That distinction in our minds at times gets blurred, it gets obliterated. While you create this excellence, you create human minds which are linked to the reality of India, who know the direction that India has to take, who don't cut off intellectually from the challenges that India faces. And if India can throw up from a great institution like this minds with that concern, I think in one of your objectives, that do you produce the elite or do you also produce those who achieve excellence? Excellence helps larger public good. Excellence helps in contributing to a larger society. It creates world beaters. It creates those categories of people with those ideas. And the future, as they say, now going is one of the big challenges which I am told by a lot of experts, that the kind of technology which is now being perceived will probably result in one of the greatest disruptions in history. When men get completely replaced by artificial intelligence which will do the jobs which some of us can do. So there will be job losses in several traditional areas. But a thinking society then will have to create jobs elsewhere. Because the world abhors a vacuum. You can't allow vacuum to exist. You can't have a generation of idle human beings. And therefore an institution of this kind which enjoys all the privileges, how does it throw up minds which lead the society? You obviously have the capacity to produce people with outstanding